Hello and welcome everyone to our very first Cloud Coaching Office Hours. We're excited to have you here today and we thank you for joining us. Oracle Cloud Engineer Mark Smith will be kicking off our session on identity and access management. And then after the topic discussion, we'll get into the Q&A portion. And we want this session to really be about you and learning from our experts. So please feel free to submit any questions in the Zoom chat. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mark.
All right, thank you, Tara. So hello again, my name is Mark Smith. I belong to the Cloud Engineering Organization here at Oracle. Today I will plan on just walking you through some very fundamental ideas, fundamental principles that apply to the Oracle Access Identity and Access Management. And so these are things that you'll need to know in order to get started right away with your cloud tenancy. So I'll just jump right into it. After this obligatory safe harbor, I'll go through a few slides, then I'll show you a brief demo, and then we'll kind of save a little bit of time. We can do a QA at the end. So first things first, there's some key concepts that have to do with identity and access management within Oracle. And here there are a couple that I'll specifically talk about, but just so that we understand right off the bat, identity and access management is just another way of describing who has access to what systems within your tenancies or within your cloud environment, and what they can do with those resources that they're accessing. So a resource is simply any kind of object within the cloud. There's, examples of these are your compute instances, your databases, block volumes, etc. And although Oracle does primarily use almost all of the same concept you're probably already familiar with in terms of users, groups, policies, etc., there is a new concept that we have established for what we call Oracle OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and it's called compartments. I'll talk about that a little bit and what it means. So first things first, let's talk about the people or the users or the people taking action, right? So these are called principals, and the principals, there are two types really. There's these users and groups, and then there's instance principals. Now today I'm probably not going to dive deep into what a instance principal is, but I will explain to you pretty thoroughly what users and groups are. So the first thing you need to know, a user, it's a persistent identity. It's set up to represent an individual, or it could be an application. So if you have an instance that needs to access, say, your block volume storage or something like that, you can set that up this way. Every user, in turn, belongs to a group. And the group, like it says, is just a collection of users. And the way it works within Oracle's Identity and Access Management, of course, is that you then attach policies to these groups. Users can be spread across, they can belong to multiple groups, but at the end, they all have to belong to at least one. So the instance principles, as I said before, is more of a way of automating. And so it helps you if you have, for example, a load balancer that has several instances spun up, and then you use auto scaling, then you would use instance principles, and you can set it up in such a way that you don't have to go in and continually do console or CLI updates. And then that note at the bottom, I just want to make sure that everybody understands. Oracle follows this basic tenet, is that it's least privilege. So no one has access, no one has permissions until they're placed into a group, and then that group has at least one policy written to then grant the permissions. And those can be attached at different levels. We'll talk about that. Tenancy is sort of the root compartment, or there can be subcompartments. Next, I wanted to give you a quick understanding of what these policies look like. So once someone has been added and they're in a group, we need to write specific rules to tell them what they can and can't do. And as you can see here, policies cannot be attached. Again, they can't be attached to a user, but only then to the group. And when you look at this, basically what it happens is you can write this in human readable format, and you write it simply by saying allow group, name your group to do XYZ. So then you put the verb in there, you specify the resource type, and then at the end you can put conditions that specify a little bit more detail or depth. So for example, you could say allow these group users to do this in the compartment, but specify only one compartment, or even specify a subcompartment, for example. And then you could even say something to the effect of, this is where the where condition shows right there at the end there. You could even say, for example, hey, this is my DBA team, and I only want them to be able to access the the database is involved. So although they're in this tenancy or this compartment, I only want them to touch one or two little pieces of that. And again, policies can be attached where you want them to. And this is important to remember because if you give someone, or if you write a policy at the root level, the very highest admin level, the only people who will be able to influence or change that policy are people who are registered as admins in that same root compartment. So if you wanted to set somebody, say for example, in a subcompartment, and you attach the policy at that point, well then anyone who's an administrator of the subcompartment can then also go through and change that policy. So you have to be a little bit careful as to how your organization is aligned, just to make sure that you attach everything in the right places. Here is a slide that shows, and although it's not the prettiest, it does give a pretty good example of what these verbs look like, and then how you would also name your resource type. Now, when we get into the console, I'll show you that there's actually a rule builder, and so it can help you if you don't want to remember all the specific syntax. It's actually a pretty easy way of doing it. You don't have to worry about having to memorize all this different stuff. But in general, you'll see on the left-hand side here, we have the verbs. And if you read from top to bottom, those verbs become increasingly more, I guess, well, let me say that better. If you read from top to bottom, the verbs at the top give the least access, and the verbs at the bottom typically give the most access. And as you read down, read will include everything that inspect can do. Use typically includes everything that read and inspect can do. And of course, manage includes everything. That's somebody who could act as a true admin and be doing just about everything within the tenancy. On the right-hand side in the blue, you'll see resource type. This is where we'll specify exactly what it is that those users are able to access. And you can create, there's a number of these that are pre-programmed in there, and they'll help you kind of again, coordinate and organize all of your resources there, and then control the access to them. And we'll talk about location and conditions here in just a second on the next slide. So this is an example of what you would write for some just basic policies. So let's say in that first use case, you have network administrators managing your cloud network, and that's how you would write it. Allow group network admins to manage virtual network family in tenancy. And again, that purple part there is the tenancy. That shows us how large or how expansive those permissions are, or how much within your group or your cloud environment they are allowed to access. The second one is if we wanted somebody to be able to write to object storage, for example. And you can see allow group writers to manage objects in compartment ABC, where, and then these are where the conditions come in. And then there's object create and also object inspect. And it's similar, very similar to that second one, is create object list objects. The third is an example of block storage and object storage encrypt and decrypt volumes and buckets. So this is an example where we're actually allowing a resource to talk to another resource or access that other resource. And so allow the block storage in a specific region name to use keys in the compartment ABC. So those are a couple common or very basic policies that would be written, but as you can see, they're not much more complicated than, again, we showed the verb, who's doing it, what they're doing, and to what limit or what extent. Now, I wanted to kind of bring this all together because I feel like that may have been a little bit fast. So although I typically hate build slides, I'm going to use one here just to kind of help you understand how it basically works. So let's say, for example, that you are the tenancy administrator or the Oracle Cloud administrator for your organization. The first thing that would happen is Oracle would provision your tenancy, so that's the root compartment. So those two words there on the screen, tenancy and root compartment, go hand in hand. And you would then be put in there as the default administrator. And so you would then belong to a pre-configured group called administrators. And this group, just for security reasons, cannot be deleted, and there always has to be at least one user inside of it. This is to ensure that you don't lock yourself out of or unintentionally delete this group, so then therefore you would be locked out of your entire tenancy. So there's a few safeguards put in place there to keep you from doing anything of that nature. And this is what it would look like. So within that, you're an administrator or a user inside the group administrators, and there is a default policy there allowing you or anybody that you add to that group to manage all resources throughout your entire OCI or Oracle Cloud Infrastructure tenancy. So then this is, again, something that cannot be deleted, cannot be taken away, but you could be adding other people to this administrators group. So probably best practices for you in your organization to identify who besides yourself should have this level of access and add them immediately. Probably one of the very first things you want to do when you're setting up your groups and users. And these basically just say what I just said. And it is important to remember that at this level especially, anyone added to that group will have the leeway to do whatever they want. So again, be careful with that. Now, this is what I was talking about, and this is how these subcompartments would look. It's important to note also that these subcompartments, all of these compartments that we're talking about, are logical constructs. So there's not any distinction here. There's not somebody in the back end actually changing around hardware or isolating your tenancy. These are all just logical constructs that help you organize your tenancy and keep track of the identity and the access throughout. So it is best practice, and we do heartily recommend that you create subcompartments throughout your organization or within your root compartment, so that they could be aligned however you see fit. They can be aligned by resource type. You could put all of your compute instances in one and your storage in another, or something to that effect. Or what you could do is you could align across a line of business. If you wanted to say, here's our HR compartment, here's our sales department, etc. That's kind of how those subcompartments would work. And just so you kind of understand a little bit better, again, we've kind of talked about what and why, but here are a few design considerations. So although each resource only belongs to a single compartment, they can be connected, they can be shared. For example, you could set up a virtual cloud network or VCN, and it could have its subnets live in different compartments. So then, again, all of that networking is done, but then you can set it up in such a way that your people only have access to those individual compartments or subcompartments. You can delete and rename compartments, and each compartment does have these subcompartments that can go all the way to 6 levels deep. So you can nest them and go all the way up and down. When doing so, important to note that these subcompartments inherit permissions from the compartment above it. So if, for example, you made someone an administrator at the subcompartment first level, they would have access to any other subcompartments created below that, etc. Or if you made somebody an administrator at the level 4, they would not have access above, so to 3, 2, or 1. And of course, after creating these compartments, you must write at least one policy. Otherwise, nothing can be done there except by someone who has administrative privileges above them. So if you were to write one of these policies and say, hey, here's my DBA team, and I want my DBA team to have access to subcompartment 3, well, you would then need to attach a policy there and designate someone from your DBA team or perhaps the IT team to be the administrator over that subcompartment 3. So with that, I think that I'm going to just move in and show you just how easily this is to do in the demonstration. I'll do this by creating a few users. I'll then create a group, add the users, and then a compartment, and I'll write a policy for the group. And feel free to put any questions you have, Q&A in the chat, and I'll go ahead and I'll access those in just a second. So here is the Oracle Cloud infrastructure just sort of launch screen. This is what you'll see after you've logged in. And you'll notice here, I just created what we call a free tier account. And so that's why I have this big upgrade button here, is because this is considered essentially a trial account. You're free to do so as well. Pretty easy, and all of this is pretty well marked so that you can understand what it is that's actually free when you're in there. A couple things I did want to note: if you run into a problem here and you feel like, hey, what's going on? My services are slow, you can always go here and check out the health dashboard. So within Oracle, they have a list of all of the different regions, availabilities, etc. Anything where potentially you would probably check here first and make sure that you aren't having any problems. with a full outage or something of that nature. On top here, quick actions button will help you just deploy something from almost like a wizard. It's a very easy setup. And then I wanted to point your attention here as well. As you start exploring this key concepts and terminology, I find to be very helpful actually. It's quick, it's built into the console itself, so you're not having to leave or go do anything. But even, for example, for today's purposes, right, it could kind of give you a little bit of an understanding of definition-wise of what are these tenancies? What does that really mean? What are these compartments? How do they work, etc. So wanted to point those two quick things out. And now I'll hop into the demonstration for identity and access management. So what I'm going to do is just go up into the hamburger menu on the left. I'll scroll all the way down to identity. And I'm just going to click there instead of to choose any one of those individually. Oh. Well, I guess you guys are going to see it anyways, even if you didn't want to. Oops. Okay, sorry for that little delay, distraction. Again, free tier, and I'll go down to identity. You have to scroll all the way down on the left-hand side, and I'll click just straight into identity. Now, here's where you'll kind of start to see, again, we're just on users on the far left-hand side. You can scroll through and see what groups exist. Again, this is the default administrators that's always existed. Policies, these are those root policies that can't be deleted. And you'll see compartments. Really, we only have those base root level compartments. So now that we kind of have an idea of where everything sits, I'm going to go in here and just create some users. Now within here, you're going to have two options. This is an IAM user, it's a local user, as opposed to you can use a user who's federated through identity or Oracle Cloud Services. There are more complicated ways to do this. You could federate through Microsoft Active Directory or Okta or something like that. But for today, I'm just going to use the local users, and I'll just create two quick users. Because they're local users, I don't even have to put in their emails or anything like that. I'll create one. And then let's just go ahead and create a second just to. Sorry, I had incorrect in there. So now you can see I have these users, and I could add them to a group, except for that I don't have one, or the only one I have is the root level administrator, right? And I don't want to add them to that, so I'm going to cancel this here, and I'll actually go out and create a group so that I can add them to that group. And you'll see that this is all really pretty quick. And once that I have that added, or once that I've created that group, I can go in here and pretty simply just add a few users. I'll add both of my users here. And now my users have been created. They've been added to their own group. The next thing I want to do is then go in and I'll create a compartment. So then I can create this subcompartment. I will go ahead and create this compartment. And then you can see here how you would begin to nest. So I can put this in my root compartment, and that will be my sort of base level, right? And then if I wanted to come down here, there is an option for us to do something that's called tagging within Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Whoops, sorry about that. It does become, it adds another level of complexity here. So what you can actually do is you can go in, and as you create these resources and compartments, you can add tags. You can create freeform tags. You can create defined tags. Those tags further help you organize everything that's done. Again, they're logical creations that you can attach. It's almost like adding a little bit of a metadata on there. And then you can go in and say, okay, even within my DB compartment that I'm creating here, I can go in and tag other resources as networking or something like that, or attach them to different cost centers. Say in HR, you wanted to put payroll versus hiring, etc. So at any rate, that's a little bit more of a complex feature, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. So I'll just go ahead and create this compartment. You can see that I now have this compartment. And then the last thing I need to do is create some policies. So when you go in here, what you want to remember is that you have to select the compartment on the far left-hand side that you want to write policies for. Otherwise, it defaults to the root, and so I would then be writing policies at the root level. And again, this influences who can access that policy and or who can change that policy. So I'll go ahead and create a policy here in my DemoD compartment. Click Create Policy, and then this was what I was talking about in terms of sort of a help. This policy builder is actually really pretty helpful. So for example, let's say I am creating just a database. I can click on this, and it gives me some pre-built options for my policies. So if I were to go in here and I would say, hey, yes, I have some DBAs, but I only want them to be accessing certain portions of it, I'll just go ahead and click this, our autonomous database. And then you can attach it immediately here to whichever group. And I'll just go ahead and pick the DemoDB group. And then you can pick, again, where does it attach to. So I'm just going to put it to my DemoDB compartment right there. And that's about as simple as it is. I can create that policy, and then everything should be working. So again, we have our groups. We have our users and our groups, and then if you click in here, you can always adjust. It's as easy if you have somebody quit or leave your organization or change roles, you can come in here as quickly as this, and you can simply remove them from that group, and all of their permissions that were assigned through the policies will go with them. It is important to note, though, as you begin to become more complicated and you set up your organization, as you write policies, the policies are written in such a way that if a user has multiple policies, or they belong to multiple groups, and then those groups' policies are allowing them to do multiple things, when they start to stack so like that, what happens is any policy that gives a user or a group access or privileges will win. So if you know, the tenet is that we have the least access. But as you continue to write these policies, if you added someone to 5 policies or 5 groups with different policies, they would have access to all of those. And so the system is not going to go through and say, hey, your policy for, you know, subcompartment 1 and subcompartment 3 are giving your person access to this giant real estate. You need to kind of be aware of what you're giving privileges to and how that all plays out, because this could become something that is, you know, a useful thing to look at, and of course you don't want people to have access where they shouldn't. So with that, I'm going to just end the demo, and I'm going to go back to these slides. And just a quick summary, we did talk about what identity and access management is, why we use it, the IAM users and the principles, and then a little bit more around the policies and the authorization, and then we talked a little bit about compartments. So with that, I'll go ahead and I have a Mac mouse, sorry for that, it always goes back and forth. But here are some helpful links, and I can go ahead and we can share these afterwards. And then finally, I was going to just talk about the whole point, the whole reason of what we're doing here is to show you a little bit about the capabilities and this program that we're talking about here, which is essentially Cloud Coaches. And what we've realized is that many times as a customer, you'll come to Oracle, you'll run into an issue, maybe a little bit of a roadblock. It doesn't rise to the level of being some kind of formal service request, or it's not a hard, heavy question. You just need a little help over that hurdle, and then you can go on. So what we've decided to, or what we've created is what we call these Cloud Coaches and Cloud Coach Clinics. And this is where we pair you one-on-one with actual cloud engineers here at Oracle. And they can work on whatever it is you want to work on. So you'll notice over here on the right-hand side, maybe your organization just purchased OCI, or Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and you're hoping to have sort of a onboarding session. If that hasn't already happened, hopefully it already happened, but if it hasn't, you could reach out to a cloud coach and you could say, hey, we'd like to have a workshop. Or if that workshop wasn't in depth enough and you need a deep dive into certain other areas, or you're considering maybe provisioning other technologies or products, call us. apply for or submit a request for a cloud coach. We'll assign one and they can help set it up. All kinds of things, maybe you need to do some help with your Terraform automation. So you need some code. Maybe you just don't know how to provision something like Oracle Management Cloud, but you'd like to give it a try. All of these are options for us, and we'd love to have a demo session or even sit down and ideate with you around some of your architecture and what you'd like to do with your organization. A couple quick examples. We worked with a financial services company here not too long ago. We built custom Splunk plugins for IDCS, and of course we shared that live with customer. We didn't recommend that they implement it right away. It needed to go through their code review as well. But obviously we're willing to share those kinds of things. There's not a big problem here with us trying to hoard that knowledge. Again, we worked with a manufacturing customer, and we wrote custom IDCS Python scripts. And again, these were something where we provided them to customers, showed them in sort of a POC type format what was possible, and then coached them through how to deploy those as well. So there was follow-up support when they ran into issues. And finally, with retail, we use what we call Oracle Integration Cloud, or OIC, which is, of course, is an integration product, and we helped them do some connections with their on-prem SOA. And then, we built this back and forth and walked the customer through how to work all this. So that's the idea behind cloud coaching. It's something where obviously you don't have to have this whole formal process. Just reach out to us, get a one-on-one cloud coach who can help you sort of get over those smaller hurdles. And then finally, as this is our inaugural kind of launch of this program where we're doing these cloud coach sessions, we wanted to let you know how they all are going to stagger. At this point in time, we're planning about one a month, where we'll go over some fundamentals. And 100%, I would love to hear any feedback that you have. If you feel like this was not deep enough, you'd like to go into further depth, if there are certain topics that you'd like to cover, I'm open to any of these suggestions, and yeah, appreciate any kind of feedback you might have.
We thank you guys again for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.